parallel there. The face of a civilization, to an outside point of view, is often its leader. The leader, the president, the prime minister, the king, the emperor, whatever, is often a person who is seen to represent the ideals of a society, whether those ideals be good, tyrannical, intolerant, or particularly inclusive and diverse. All of these attributes are often reflected in a leader. A leader's policies, the way that they choose to govern, and how they express themselves and those leadership qualities and take their people to the future. In terms of the Cardassians, during the Dominion War, we got 3 leaders who all represent a very different face for the Cardassian people. And we're going to quickly review these people and see just what they represented to the Cardassian people while they led it, and where they took the Cardassian people while they were in charge. So, first of all, of course, during the Dominion War we have Gul Dukat. Basically, his history is pretty well documented. He was the overseer of the Cardassian occupation of Bajor. By this point, he was already a seasoned and experienced military commander. He's an excellent strategist. He can be very aggressive, but he does have a level head. Gul Dukat was infamous for his appetites, shall we say, but generally, although self-indulgent, narcissistic, and extremely arrogant, it was backed up by a high degree of competency. He was very seductive, very charming, very intelligent, and very good at forward planning. Generally speaking, he was the leader Cardassia needed at the time, and he even seemed to have had a plan to remove the Dominion later. He was so well trusted even by his Dominion allies that he personally, unlike Weyoun or even the Changeling, directly oversaw military actions, even with the Changeling having a relatively decent degree of tolerance for this individual, despite the fact that he was, although a willing member of the Dominion, he was not Vorta or Jem'Hadar. But he enrolled the Cardassians into the Dominion. He was beloved by the people, but ultimately would step away from it due to his personal obsessions, his ego, and various other problems that he had that spilled over into severe personality disorders as he grew older. And that sort of took him out of the running. But in the early stages, he had been an excellent leader for Cardassia. Under his tutelage, thanks to his alliance with the Dominion, realizing that the fight against the Klingons was draining the Cardassian economy and killing many of his people in a futile war that he realized they weren't going to win. With the Maquis and other problems also plaguing the Cardassians, he realized by joining the Dominion, they'd get the fist they needed. Likely his plan was to collapse the wormhole and prevent the Dominion from continuing to come in, and once the Cardassians were strong enough, to remove the Dominion. That's probably what he was planning, can't say that for certain. Next, we had Legate Dumar. Unlike his predecessor, and in many ways idol, Gul Dukat, he actually took a title of Legate, meaning he was the actual leader of the Cardassian people, with Dukat actually keeping the title of Gul because he felt it made him more approachable in a military government and more accessible to the people, and didn't make him seem as aloof and arrogant and high up as he actually was. This was more of an ego stroking, as he wanted the people to love him, which was one of Gul Dukat's problems. Dumar was much more pragmatic, but he was much more of an aggressive leader. He also had no love for the Dominion. Like many Cardassians, he'd rejoiced when they first joined, but he later came to see the Dominion more for what it was, a totalitarian state that had conquered his people without any resistance. He had helped lead his people into damnation, and he regretted that decision. He'd backed the wrong horse. He devolved into alcoholism and debauchery, but ultimately would be dragged out of it when he saw a glimmer of hope when he became a rebel leader. He took the Cardassian people through a period of strife and difficulty as he saw his place within the Dominion diminish and weaken, and he was a lot less beloved by the Cardassian people. Dumar again was a more pragmatic individual, but he wasn't the strategist and the charmer that Dukat was. Dukat was able to build a cult of personality and was also an excellent strategist, whereas Dumar, he was a good strategist, and he actually turned out to be an extremely competent leader when he was given a goal, when he had a plan. But he did openly admit, unlike Dukat, he was able to see when he needed help. He was able to accept that help even from former enemies, seeing the bigger picture, overcoming his hatred and prejudices of Bajoran, particularly Colonel Kira Nerys. He was able to get past it and work with her and embrace her and take her assistance in helping lead his people to a new future. He could have been the peacetime leader the Cardassians really needed, but unfortunately didn't get, as he was killed in the final hours of the liberation of Cardassia. Some might see this as a fitting end, as sometimes he could be brutal, and he had a twisted and somewhat shady past, but he was ultimately, certainly by Cardassian standards, an honourable man. You saw a lot of growth in his character and as a person. During the Dominion War, although he was a reasonably good strategist and he was very good at resource allocation, he was a very good behind-the-scenes kind of leader in terms of logistics and organizational structure. He just lacked the sort of command presence necessarily that Dukat had had. Next, he was replaced by Broca. Broca we know a lot less about exactly where he was from and what his past was. He seemed to be, although a military officer wearing military uniform, he had more of a military political background. He was much more of a simp to the founder than either of the other two had been. The Cardassians didn't like him, the Dominion didn't particularly like him, and Weyoun had a fairly low tolerance for him, considering him to be kind of a weasel. And that's saying a lot from a massive brown nose like Weyoun. Still love you, Weyoun, though. Broca was very willing to sell out his people. He was interested in his own power and glory, and his loyalty to the founder, although was probably realistically questionable, and her judgment that he likely would have changed sides and gone with the other Cardassians, as that was the way the wind was blowing, was probably accurate. He did everything he could to show his loyalty. He was willing to throw his own people on the sword at the instant whim of the founder, because his goal was his own personal power and glory. This actually meant that he had something in common with Dukat. He was not as altruistic and much more patriotic about his people like Dumar was. Broca was ultimately killed when the Changeling ordered that all Cardassians, for their betrayal of the Dominion, be exterminated, and he was shot by a group of Jem'Hadar. So what do these three individuals represent about the Cardassian people? Well, they represent the vanity, the arrogance, the glory, the brutality, and somewhat the sadism that is often associated with the Cardassians. Although these three men are not really similar, they superficially might seem that way, but their actual approaches to politics, the leadership, everything is all radically different. The strongest of the leaders was almost certainly Dukat. Dumar was a very strong leader, very competent, but in a different way. He was much more a patriot, whereas Dukat was more, I go where the power is, ultimately chasing it all the time. Whereas Broca was an opportunistic parasite that latched onto power but didn't really exude any himself. They represented three different styles of leadership, with Broca's being the weakest, Dukat's possibly being the most destructive, and Dumar maybe being actually the best and the true hope for Cardassia, with many Cardassians looking up to him as a hero of the Union. But with all that out of the way, and we're talking about what these three men are like, what do you think about these three characters? Who do you think was the best leader for Cardassia? Who do you think had the most impact, and which one of them was the leader the Cardassian people needed at their time of need? Because let's not forget that although they don't seem it, and the Cardassians perhaps, even as Garrett pointed out, maybe deserved it for selling out the Alpha Quadrant, they were in a sense the first people conquered by the Dominion. They just didn't know they were being conquered until it was too late, and perhaps even suffered the worst under the Dominion, more so than other races. Other races and peoples the Dominion conquered, they killed military personnel, destroyed ships. With the Cardassians, they leveled cities. They killed 800 million civilians on a whim, not to mention all the other Cardassians and their resources and colonies that were killed and destroyed and depleted during the war. So which one of these three leaders, in your opinion, really saved Cardassia?